he got diplomatic relations with the U.S. in exchange for it, but did not get any protection. The Iranians, and you see this in the Iranian newspapers, they say, look what Gaddafi did. He essentially emasculated himself. He castrated himself. He laid himself bare before the Americans. And then when there was a little bit of rebellion, the Americans came and said, okay, enough of Gaddafi. So if you live in the Middle East, you want nuclear weapons. So we have to approach that from understanding that it is rational from their point. There are irrational elements to what these people do, the leadership. But we have to approach it from the perspective that it makes sense from an Iranian perspective to want to have nuclear weapons. I don't know if that answers your question, but...
I have a question. I wonder whether, so much is made both by folks on the right of the issue and on the left of the issue about the relationship between Israeli and American policy, and whether there is daylight between them and whether there ought to be daylight between them. And I'm wondering whether the Iran issue is a way to understand how that dynamic may or may not be changing. So in other words, are the interests of the United States and Israel with regard to Iran and other significant foreign strategic issues necessarily the same? And at what point does Israel have to or does the United States have to kind of clarify that there's distance?
I would say on the issue of Iran, there is no daylight between the views of President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu that it's unacceptable for Iran to acquire nuclear weapons. It doesn't mean that, obviously, with two different countries, we've had disagreements on other issues. And also there's while this is an incredibly important issue for American security, one has to realize that in Israel, this is the preeminent issue. This is you ask about foreign policy of the military. I mean, this is 100%. We have Afghanistan, we have Iraq. Yes, we have Iran and nuclear weapons. We have other concerns across the world. So this is one of the top issues. For Israel, it is the issue. But no, I believe that President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu are on the same page with regard to Iran.
I would agree with that, and I also think that if we may have had political, or the administration may have had political disagreements, the two administrations, over the last 4 years or so. But if you look at the deployment of our military assets and the work that we've done with Israel to protect it with respect to Iran, I think not only is there no daylight, I don't think there's ever been a closer deployment. That's what people tell me. Jeff may have a different view, but that's my understanding. And I think that's a reflection of the fact that we have very closely aligned interests here. There is that temporal issue I was talking about earlier, that question about Israel's ability to be able to attack and destroy the Iranian nuclear capability, which may be on a shorter time frame than our ability to be able to do that. But I don't think that's a difference in interest, it's a difference in potential time.
Well, it becomes a difference in interests if it becomes, if Israel approaches the moment when it feels it can no longer strike, and if it doesn't trust that President Obama would do it, then it becomes, what becomes no daylight becomes a kind of a chasm. I mean, the issue here, and you're right, this administration has done more for U.S.-Israel military cooperation than any other administration in history. It's a strange dichotomy we're dealing with. And President Obama doesn't get enough credit on that from a lot of parties. One of the reasons he doesn't get enough credit on that is because the personal relationship between the Prime Minister and the President is so bad. I mean, they attempt to patch it and fix it and backfill, but it's not a completely functional relationship. And and there's two levels to this. The first level is, could they actually trust? Do the Israelis actually trust that President Obama would pull the trigger if Israel decides that it's going to outsource its own security to the United States? The second issue is, and this is what they say, and this goes back to discussion about proliferation, the Israelis will say very acerbically, look, the United States is 0 for 2 in preventing nuclear proliferation. We're 2 for 2. What they mean by that is the U.S. did not want Pakistan to get nukes, and it got nukes. The U.S. did not want North Korea to get nukes, and it got nukes. The Israelis, on the other hand, struck in Iraq in 1981 to destroy its nuclear reactor, and in 2007 they struck Syria to destroy its nuclear program. So they say it's not about whether President Obama hates Jews or hates Israel or loves Israel or whatever. It's America has not succeeded in stopping countries that doesn't want to get nukes from getting nukes. So that's, I agree on the one hand that the relationship is very close. On the other hand, there's a lot of doubt on that side of the fence about whether America would actually pull this off. I don't know how you respond to that.
Me?
Yeah, you.
I think, look, nobody, as the president said in his interview with you, and if you haven't read the interview with Jeff that the president did, where he talked about how the policy of the United States is not contained in Iran, it's a
By the way, just so in the interest of full disclosure, I'm usually not this familiar with United States senators, but we happen to be friends, and I also happen to work for his brother. Who is the editor of The Atlantic, where you would find this. So he's doing a nice job also, by the way, of touting The Atlantic to you. And I'll report back to headquarters shortly.
My brother often points out that every state gets 2 senators, but that there's only one editor of The Atlantic. He's a successful. But as the president said, the proof is in the eating. And that's true. And I think we just have to get up and continue every day to try to advance the ball. This week in Baghdad, I think the work, as I said earlier, of getting the international community actually... Look, there's a reason why there are oil tankers sitting off the coast of Iran that are full of Iranian oil that's not being purchased by anybody around the world. That's an accomplishment. And I think we just have to keep working that. And in the hope that we can figure out a way to get them to change direction before somebody, whether it's Israel or the United States, decides that it's in its interest to use military force, and with the full understanding that if that decision is made, or when that decision is made, it's going to be made by people acting in the interests of the people that they represent. So
I am watching the time carefully. You all are welcome to stay as long as you want. It's just after 11, but if I could sneak in one more question, I'd love to do that. So I guess it's a...
For once, I get to go home and say to my wife, the rabbi made me do it.
I can write you a note. I'm happy to write you a note.
I'm never going home.
You're right. If you just say, the rabbi went on and on, she'll be like, oh, right, of course. So the question I have is, what do you all make of the talks that have been unfolding about nukes in Iran and the kind of multinational discussions, and also, and this is sort of relates to the previous question. I just want to press a little bit on the daylight issue. It makes sense to me that we all agree that the United States isn't going to do anything that catches Israel by surprise, but could you all imagine a situation, regardless of the outcomes of any current discussions, in which Israel does something that the United States doesn't feel good about?
Well, I think of course if Israel, not of course, but I think it's quite likely if Israel takes action, they would not pre-consult with us. We would find out about it during the operation or immediately after the operation. Doesn't mean there's not appropriate intelligence sharing. It just means that they would likely not let us know ahead of time. So I'm sure we have worked through scenarios of our reactions to that. It's also possible that there could be an ask of us associated with an operation, at which point our commander-in-chief would have to make a decision about any supporting role in an operation. It's also likely that we have our own operational plans that certainly have not received the go-ahead, but we know what we would do, what we have the capability of doing as well. But the most likely scenario, if there's going to be any action in the short term, would be Israel would do something, and we would have to react to that. Not only that, this is very important geopolitically, because the perceptions of U.S. involvement with the operation, even if those perceptions exceeded reality, as they quite likely will affect Iran's retaliations and exactly what they do to retaliate against a strike. Do they target narrowly Israeli military institutions? That would be kind of the best case scenario if they attack a few military targets. Or the worst case scenario, do they attack American and Israeli interests globally? And I think we don't know the answer to that. But I think it certainly the perception benefits America that we were not, involved with the operation, which is also likely to be the reality.
I guess I would just say that I really do, that you said you're pressing the daylight. I think that, at least to the moment, from a policy perspective, there isn't a lot. There isn't daylight. And I think it's important that we continue to send that message to Iran, because part of this is that we don't want them to miscalculate about what our intentions are. And Jeff will talk about this, I'm sure, after we leave, but part of this is this whole debate that's going on in our country about where to draw red lines or whether to draw red lines, and what do you want to create a situation where Iran goes right up to that red line and stops? Are you better off not doing that, or are we better off giving Iran the ability to make progress from our point of view away from the decision to make nuclear weapons, which itself consists of drawing some lines other than just the one of saying no nuclear weapon at all. He'll give you a much more articulate view of that. But I want to say before I leave that I do think it serves no one's interest, Israel's interest and the United States' interest, for this issue to be consumed in a partisan political debate here in the United States. For any party to seek any political advantage, partisan political advantage on this issue, I think does nothing but help Iran, and confuses the message that the administration is trying to send, whether that administration is a Democratic or Republican administration. And I say that because I've detected this in the air, and I think we need to be vigilant about that and make sure that we all really have the facts about what the relationship looks like, and make your own evaluation about that. But we shouldn't let U.S. domestic partisanship confuse either ourselves or the world about how serious we are about this threat. I gotta go because now my wife really will come. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.